Hello once again to my fellow HO and 1/32 scale slot car fans. This is Mark Natividad over at West Coast Slot Cars in Los Angeles, California. Greetings, salutation, how's it going everybody? I hope everybody is alive and well, doing great and racing a lot of slot cars. Another great video today, and before I begin the video, as always, I would just like to thank all of those of you who subscribe and like and comment and take the time to share your information in the hobby. It's just a wonderful hobby, and no better way that I can share than shoot these videos for you. So there's my contact information. If you need to reach me, please feel free to do so. You can reach me here on this channel in the comments, or you can contact me directly, email, cell phone, whichever you like. All right, let's get into today's video. Well, I have been doing a lot of racing, a lot of Group C racing with a couple of slot car clubs. One club is the Far Out Slot Car Club, and we just had a big race up in Los Angeles, and we had another race a few weeks ago, or last month. Was it last month? Beginning of the month. It was the beginning of this month in Glendale, and also at Electric Dreams. I've been racing there too. However, there has been a lot of discussion. A lot of new people are coming into the hobby, and just like any other new person in the hobby, the quest for information and the excitement created around certain things, we get misguided. So I want to make sure that we don't get misguided and that we get information that we need to make good decisions in what we buy. So today's video is going to be on two Slot-It Group C models. We're going to do the Sauber Mercedes, and let's just, for the nature of the video, say old chassis versus new chassis, or older slot car, Slot-It, versus new Slot-It slot car. So on the outside, these are just going to look regular Mercedes, exactly the same, except for the liveries on them. And when we get down to the bottom and the nuts and bolts and the insides, these two cars do not perform the same, especially the older chassis versus the newer chassis. So we're going to get into that and talk about why they don't work and what happens, and trying to switch over and putting an older body on a newer chassis. We're going to talk about all that. So I already took the screws off, so we'll go ahead and take the tops off of these. And here we go. You can see the insides of the chassis. So notice a couple of things right off the bat. Let me get these up for you. You can see the differences in the chassis styles. You can see a difference in the configuration. The newer chassis on the left side here has the area for the digital chip, whereas the older one does not. That's one big major difference off the bat. Also the front, where we have the wheels, the axle going through the axle holes. The newer chassis has the adjustments, and it has the places for the grub screws to go in from the bottom and the top so that you can adjust your ride height. The older chassis, however, does not. A couple of ways you can adjust it. Pretty much the only way is by shaving down the top of the shims, which the axle sits on, and or truing down the tires. So either or both. So those will get you the ride height that you need, but fair warning, you can't shave too much and you can't true too much, because your chassis will be bottoming out. So I think that's about it for the front. My chassis on this side I set that up with the adjustable guide. That is the Slot-It CH10, which has the screw in there, and this again is the plastic one that it comes with stock. Let's see. The motors are the same. So going back toward the motors and the motor pod, those two are exactly the same. Let's flip these back over, and I want to talk about the screws that adjust the motor pod. All right, I think I'm going to have to hold these up because you probably won't see these well if I don't. Okay, so if you'll notice, I'll use my screwdriver for a pointer. The screw holes for the newer chassis and the screw holes for the older chassis. As you can see, those holes are going to be a lot larger, and these are going to be a lot tighter. Therefore, the larger holes will allow you for that float in the motor pod back to forth, more so, not up and down, but back and forth. Whereas this motor pod, I mean, unless you were to ream those out and expand those out, you're probably not going to get any float at all. You can get up to down, but you're not going to get any back and forth because there's no room for those screw heads to move. So that's a major difference, especially with these cars. In racing these cars, they basically perform better with that motor pod float. As if you haven't done so, you'll go ahead and give it a try. Back those off a few turns, a quarter turn, a half a turn, and see how much more optimal that chassis runs. All right, so that's the difference in the chassis and the motor pod. Also, I must add on the motor pod that this is I believe that's a 0.5, and I believe I put a 0.5 motor pod in there. Now, another way to get the chassis or the car to sit lower, the chassis to sit lower on the track is to go up. You can go to the 1.0, and that may or may not be too low depending on how you've got your tires trued, if you are truing your tires. So there's some adjustability there, but even if you're going to put in a newer pod in the older chassis, you're still not going to get any float. That's just the way it is unless you expand those holes. All right, let's turn them back over, and let's point something else out here. Okay, so one guy had asked me, why don't I just take one of these bodies, I'll just use this body, and put it on the newer chassis? Well, I have to tell you right off the bat that actually will not work. And the reason that will not work is because there's some parts in here that need to come out. And I mean, I like to keep the model as is, as I bought it, and it's going to have these plastic pieces in here. I use my screwdriver so you can see that. It's going to have these in there, and those are in there, and then there's a little bit of a protrusion on the plastic, and that might hit the chassis as well. You could try it, but as far as I know, I have not been able to get one of these chassis, the newer chassis in the older style body. I even had another one which had these pieces went all the way into this plastic piece here. So I wasn't able to even, I didn't want to cut it out again. I want to keep my chassis pristine and as they were in the box out of the factory. So that's why you can't use a newer body on an older chassis or older body on a newer chassis. I think that works both ways. So the older, speaking of the older one here, this is actually, that will work. So the strike that statement. Again, the compatibility of the chassis. This is the older chassis on the newer body, but that will work, but it's not going to perform as well if you're doing some competitive racing with the newer chassis. So there you have it. There's the information. There's what is and what isn't, and why you would want to use a specific chassis for a specific race. If everybody was racing the same chassis, I think that it would be fine. I think it would be fine if everybody just had the same chassis, if it's an older one versus a newer one, because there's a clear disadvantage for those using the older chassis. So it's a bummer that you can't use the newer chassis in the older body, because they do look cool. I mean, this is such a nice body. I love it. It's one of my favorites. And also the other one is the gray one, which is the number 63. Sauber as well, one of the first Slot-It Group C Mercedes that was put out by Slot-It. So there you have it. A couple of my other custom things I replaced. This is probably my third tail on this one, because this is my race car. So there's a lot of hammering on the track and crashing and bashing. And not that I'm falling off a lot, it's just other people fall off in front of you and off you go, and then coming around and bang, your car gets in an accident. So the great thing is that the tail is completely replaceable. However, these are a little bit harder to get. You can replace this with a tear-proof or a break-proof spoiler, but it's not going to have the nice graphics. It's not going to have this, and if you're lucky and it breaks off in a certain place, you can epoxy that on. We'll have at it. So I think that is pretty much going to do it for the comparison of the two. You got your older style chassis versus your newer style chassis, and some of the things you can and can't do. And but all in all, if you love racing, if you love to race these cars, hey, just race them. Put them on the track. Don't let the thunder be taken away from your parade there. So make sure that you're having fun. And the bottom line is, that's the bottom line, is to have fun. So there are people who are more competitive. That's just the way this hobby is. And, setting up the car and getting into the advanced setups and getting information and getting educated about what you can or can't do and within the rules. And there's so many things about these cars, but they are just great cars. It's a fun group to run, the Group C, because there's such a great variety of cars made by Slot-It. And, the motors, you get a good motor, sometimes you get a bad motor. In our class, in our club rules, we can actually have gears. We can do the gears. We can put weights in the motor pod. We can use any tires or hubs. We can use any guide flag. So wooden track, we're definitely using the wooden guide flag for the CH7, I believe, for the Slot-It cars. All right, well, that's enough of my madness and information and babbling about the Slot-It cars. And I hope that it allows you to get good information. It has allowed you to get some education on these cars. And hopefully you don't run out and buy an older style slot car and expect to put it on a new chassis underneath it. So there you go. Hopefully that will save you some money and some headache in the long run. And of course, any opinions or comments or other is definitely appreciated, and I appreciate all of you. And I want to thank you for watching my video once again. And I always love sharing this hobby. I always will, and I'll keep the channel going as long as you guys keep watching. So that's about it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and sign out. Once again, this is Mark Natividad over at West Coast Slot Cars in Los Angeles, California, saying goodbye for now and race happy.